For years, the police searched for him, and every attempt ended the same way. Nothing. No clear sightings, no usable fingerprints, no digital trail that could point to where he went. It was as if this man had erased himself from existence. Investigators chased rumors across cities and borders, questioned old friends, and reviewed endless surveillance footage, yet his name never appeared anywhere. As time passed, the case grew colder, and many began to believe he was either dead or living so far away that he would never be found. But the truth was far more unsettling. He wasn't hiding in a remote jungle or a foreign country. He was closer than anyone imagined, living quietly, watching life move on, convinced he had beaten the system. And for a long time he was right, until one ridiculous, almost laughable mistake shattered years of careful planning and exposed everything he had tried so hard to bury. When criminals run, most of them make mistakes within days. They call the wrong person, use a tracked phone, or return to places connected to their past. This man did none of that. From the very beginning, he understood exactly how investigations worked. He stayed patient, disciplined, and invisible. Weeks turned into months, and months turned into years, while detectives slowly ran out of leads. The case was pushed aside, reopened, and pushed aside again, becoming one of those files that haunted investigators who refused to let it go. What no one realized at the time was that the man they were hunting had grown comfortable. He built a routine, blended into normal life, and started believing he was untouchable. That belief, that quiet confidence, would become his downfall, because after years of doing everything right, he made one small decision that seemed harmless, ordinary, and completely forgettable. But that single moment was enough to connect him back to his past and end a mystery that had frustrated police for years. For years, the police searched for him, and every attempt ended the same way. Silence. No confirmed sightings, no financial activity, no traceable communication. His name became a ghost inside police databases, a file that refused to close, but also refused to move forward. Investigators retraced his last known steps again and again, hoping something new would suddenly appear. But the trail always stopped at the same dead end. It was as if the man had stepped outside the rules of reality itself, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and frustration. Each passing year made the mystery heavier, turning his disappearance into a quiet challenge to the system that was supposed to catch people like him. The case began with a crime serious enough to trigger an immediate and intense response. From the moment it was discovered, authorities knew they were dealing with someone dangerous, someone who could not simply be allowed to vanish. In the early days, optimism filled the investigation rooms. Detectives believed it was only a matter of time before a mistake was made or a witness came forward. Search teams worked around the clock, neighborhoods were questioned, and surveillance footage was reviewed frame by frame. Yet despite the urgency, the suspect was already gone. By the time police realized how carefully planned the escape was, the window to catch him had already closed. What made the situation even more unsettling was how clean the disappearance was. There were no emotional goodbyes, no rushed movements, no obvious signs of panic. This was not someone running blindly from fear. This was someone executing a plan. Investigators noticed that accounts were closed at just the right time. Possessions were sold quietly, and connections were cut without raising suspicion. Every detail suggested patience and foresight. But the man had prepared for this moment long before anyone else realized he needed to. That realization forced detectives to confront a disturbing truth. They were not chasing an impulsive criminal, but someone who understood exactly how to stay hidden. As days turned into weeks, the investigation expanded beyond local borders. Federal agencies were alerted, and international databases were checked. Airports, bus terminals, and train stations were monitored retroactively, searching for a face that might have slipped through unnoticed. Hundreds of tips poured in from the public, each one offering hope before collapsing into disappointment. Sightings were reported in distant cities, then in other countries, but none could be verified. Each false lead drained more time and resources, slowly wearing down the confidence of even the most experienced investigators. Months passed and the case began to change. What was once an urgent manhunt slowly transformed into a long-term mystery. New cases demanded attention, budgets shifted, and the disappearance was quietly pushed to the side. Still, a small group of detectives refused to let it go. They revisited old evidence late at night, convinced that something had been missed. They knew that disappearances like this rarely stayed perfect forever. Somewhere, they believed, there had to be a crack, a tiny flaw hidden beneath years of careful planning. While police searched, the man they were hunting was adjusting to a new reality. He woke up each day under a different name, surrounded by people who knew nothing about his past. He learned how to act normal again, how to make casual conversation without revealing too much, how to blend into routines so ordinary that no one would ever remember him. That was his greatest strength, being forgettable. He chose places where nobody asked questions, and jobs that required little background checking. The outside world, he was just another face in the crowd. Living like this required constant discipline. He avoided forming close relationships, knowing that attachment could lead to exposure. He stayed away from technology as much as possible, understanding how easily digital footprints could betray him. No social media, no online shopping, no unnecessary communication. Every decision was filtered through one question: could this get me caught? For years, the answer was always no. And with each passing day of freedom, his confidence grew stronger. Eventually, confidence began to shift into something more dangerous: comfort. The fear that once kept him alert slowly faded into the background. He stopped checking over his shoulder as often. He allowed himself small luxuries, tiny risks that made life feel normal again. He convinced himself that if the police had not found him by now, they never would. That belief settled deep in his mind, reshaping the way he thought about the past. The crime that once haunted him became distant, almost unreal, like a story that happened to someone else. Back in the investigation offices, years had passed with little progress. New detectives were assigned to the case, reading through old files with fresh eyes. To them, the story felt unfinished, incomplete. They questioned assumptions made years earlier and challenged conclusions that had gone unquestioned for too long. Technology had improved, databases had expanded, and techniques had evolved. What once seemed impossible now felt worth another attempt. Quietly, without announcements or press conferences, the case was reopened. The breakthrough did not come from a dramatic discovery or a sudden confession. It came from something painfully ordinary. A routine check, a minor inconsistency, a detail so small it could have been ignored. One of the detectives noticed a pattern that didn't quite make sense, a name that appeared briefly, then disappeared again. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to spark curiosity. It's a kind of curiosity that keeps investigators awake at night. As they followed this fragile thread, pieces slowly began to align. Records that once meant nothing now formed a subtle connection. A location matched a timeline. Description matched an old photograph. Nothing was conclusive on its own, but together, they painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. The man who had vanished years ago might not be gone at all. He might be living under a new identity, hiding behind paperwork that looked legitimate at first glance. What finally exposed him was a single decision, small, careless, and completely human. After years of avoiding attention, he allowed himself one moment of convenience. One action that felt safe because it seemed so normal. He underestimated how closely even the smallest details could be examined. That choice created a link, and once that link existed, it could be followed. The years of invisibility collapsed into days of intense scrutiny. Surveillance began quietly. No dramatic confrontations, no sudden moves. Detectives watched from a distance, confirming habits, routines, and behaviors. Everything matched. The man they were observing was calm, predictable, and unaware that the past was finally catching up to him. He went about his days believing he was still invisible, still untouchable, but the net had already closed. When the arrest finally happened, it was almost anticlimactic. No chase, no resistance, no last-minute escape. Just a knock, a few words, and a realization that the long run was over. Years of careful planning ended in a single moment of silence. The man who had once disappeared without a trace was now standing in handcuffs. Facing the reality he had avoided for so long, in the aftermath, investigators reflected on the case with a mix of relief and disbelief. Years of effort had been undone by one ridiculous mistake. Not because the man wasn't intelligent, but because he was human, grew tired, comfortable, and overconfident. His story became a reminder to both criminals and law enforcement alike. No plan is perfect forever. In the end, This case wasn't about technology or luck. It was about time. Time erodes discipline. Time creates confidence, and time always reveals the smallest cracks. You can run, you can hide, and you can even disappear for years. But eventually something slips. And when it does, the truth has a way of finding its way back to the surface.